After Takeoff was killed in Houston in 2022, his mother inherited a piece of one of the most complicated legal battles hip-hop has seen in years. The woman who raised one of Migos' most gifted members from childhood in Georgia went from covering the basics to overseeing a $26 million estate, controlling her son's entire music catalog, and sitting at the center of an inheritance war that's still being fought in courtrooms right now. But the real story behind that money, and behind everything Takeoff left behind, is a lot more layered than the headlines suggest. Let's start with the bond, because it's the legal foundation everything else is built on. Kursnik Karibal, the world knew him as Takeoff, was raised largely by his mother, Titania Davenport, as a single parent from childhood. That's not just family narrative, it's language that later showed up directly in court filings. She was the constant presence while he figured out who he was becoming, without a co-parent, without outside financial help, in a household where there was no guarantee any of his dreams would turn into something real. She was there in the early Migos days too, before the world believed in the group the way she already did. That unwavering presence before he had anything to offer in return would later become the legal cornerstone of everything that came after his death. Because once the money started coming in, Takeoff reversed the relationship. Court documents state that once he achieved success, he covered most, if not all, of her living expenses: housing, vehicles, clothing, food, utilities. Quietly, consistently, without turning it into a social media moment. That ongoing arrangement, built over decades, is central to the legal case that followed. On November 1st, 2022, Takeoff was at 810 Billiards and Bowling in downtown Houston with his uncle Quavo at a private party when a dice game escalated into gunfire. He was shot in the head and torso and died at 28. He wasn't the one involved in public beefs or drama. He was simply there. A man named Patrick Xavier Clark was later charged with his murder, has denied the charges claiming self-defense, and his criminal trial is scheduled to begin November 5th, 2026. Takeoff died without a will, without a spouse, and without children. His estate, valued at an estimated $26 million, had no roadmap for where it was supposed to go, meaning Georgia's intestacy laws would have to determine everything, a process that's still running today, nearly 4 years later. Here's where the $30 million figure everyone's heard about actually comes from. In June 2023, Titania, acting as both his mother and estate administrator, filed a negligence lawsuit against 810 Billiards and Bowling. The original filing listed damages at $1 million, but the argument went deeper. That venue operators knew celebrities would be present that night, knew the location sat in a high crime area, and still failed to provide adequate professional security. 2 security guards on site reportedly heard the gunfire, but never actually saw the shooter, which became central to the negligence claim. The case moved through Texas courts for over 2 years before settling at the end of 2025 for a confidential sum. That number has never been made public. The $30 million figure circulating online doesn't appear in any court document because the settlement is sealed. What we know for certain is that money changed hands, and almost immediately, a new fight broke out over how to divide an amount nobody outside that courtroom actually knows. That fight didn't come from the bowling alley, it came from Takeoff's father. Kenneth Ball had filed no legal action related to his son's death until December 2023, more than a year after Takeoff was killed. When he entered the Texas case as what's called an intervener, attaching himself to a lawsuit Titania had already been driving for months. His filing cited funeral expenses and loss of financial support, and once the settlement landed, his position was direct. He wanted half, based on Texas wrongful death law, which generally allows both biological parents to share in proceeds regardless of the relationship they actually had with the deceased. Titania's legal team didn't hold back in response. Their filings described Ball as largely absent from Takeoff's life, citing negligible financial support and effectively no emotional presence, drawing a sharp contrast between a father who showed up legally a full year after his son's death and a mother who'd been there since birth, raising him alone and supporting his career before there was any money to speak of. Their argument was simple. A man who was barely present shouldn't walk away with an equal share of a settlement secured through the grief and legal effort of the parent who never left. Ball never directly addressed those characterizations publicly. His position stayed that biology alone entitles him to a share under the law, regardless of emotional history. From there, the fight expanded into something bigger than money. a battle over which states' courts even get to decide this. Ball wanted the case to stay in Texas, where it originated. Titania's team pushed to move it to Georgia, arguing that both parents are Georgia residents. Nearly every relevant witness lives there, and a probate case for the estate had already been opened in Fulton County. Ball called the move surreptitious, claiming he wasn't properly notified. But Titania's team pointed out his own Georgia probate attorneys had been active in the case for 3 years and were electronically served the same day she filed. That argument didn't land. This wasn't an ambush. It was strategy, and it worked. As of July 2026, a Georgia probate court has agreed to take jurisdiction. A hearing is scheduled for September 21, 2026, and this fight is now strictly between Takeoff's two parents in exactly the courtroom Titania wanted from the start. And that positioning matters enormously because of a legal wrinkle most coverage has completely missed. Under Georgia law, there's a formal distinction between biological fatherhood and legal fatherhood. A father who was never married to the child's mother generally needs to go through a process called legitimation, a court order formally establishing legal parenthood to have standing in matters like inheritance or wrongful death distribution. If Kenneth Ball never went through that process, Georgia courts may not recognize him as a legal parent at all, regardless of biology. That single question could be what the September hearing actually turns on, and it changes everything about how this case gets decided. So what does Titania actually control right now? Takeoff was already covering her housing before he died, and that property now factors into the estate she administers. Beyond physical assets, the real value sits in his music catalog. His verses across every Migos project, his solo album only built for Infinity Links, his features and publishing rights, all generating streaming royalties and licensing income daily. That catalog doesn't depreciate, it compounds, and his name, image, and likeness carry commercial value well beyond the music itself. All of it sits under that $26 million estate valuation, and as administrator, Titania is responsible for inventorying, protecting, and eventually distributing every piece of it, not simply receiving a check. Without a will, Georgia's intestacy laws determine the outcome, not Takeoff's personal wishes, which means she's been running an active legal and financial operation for nearly 4 years while grieving her son. Meanwhile, the criminal case runs on a completely separate track. Patrick Xavier Clark's trial in November 2026 has no bearing on the civil settlement, which has already concluded, but it still carries enormous weight for the family's sense of closure. Public reaction since this story broke in June 2026 has leaned heavily in Titania's favor. People who followed Takeoff's career already knew the narrative, that his mother raised him, that he took care of her once he could, that the bond was real. A father entering the picture a year after the fact to claim half struck a nerve across the culture, even among legal commentators who acknowledge Ball may have a technical claim under Texas law. But the case has moved to Georgia now, where the rules and the legitimation question are different. If Ball can't establish legal parenthood under Georgia's standard, none of the sympathy arguments on either side will even matter. The court could rule he has no standing to collect anything at all, resolving this not on who was the better parent, but on who's legally recognized as one. So here's the real picture behind the headline. The actual settlement number is sealed and unknown. The estate is valued at $26 million and still moving through Fulton County probate. Titania is the administrator, not necessarily the outright owner, actively fighting her son's father in court while managing a music catalog, real estate, and financial holdings that will shape how Takeoff's legacy gets handled for decades. The lifestyle people are calling insane, the housing, the stability, was something her son built for her while he was alive, long before any settlement existed. What she actually inherited wasn't just money, it was a legal war she didn't ask for, and a mission to protect everything her son built, all while still grieving him. September 21st, 2026. Mark it, because whatever comes out of that Georgia courtroom is going to define the next chapter of one of hip-hop's most closely watched estates, and the culture will be watching every second of it. Do you think Titania deserves to keep the full settlement, or should the law apply regardless of who was actually there? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the update when that September hearing drops.